Oh, Lilith, that's so good of you. A nice little Daredevil icon. Perfect. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. That's right. We're back for another episode of Capes and Lunatics. To me, Phil, Lilith Hellfire, of course, and we have a very special guest. If you've read Daredevil in the 90s, I'm sure you probably have read at least some of the issues written by this man. He wrote many. Mr. D.G. Chichester. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hello, Phil. Hello, Lilith. Thank you guys for having me on. I love your podcast. Love the name of your podcast. A lot of fun to be here.
Yeah, some of us are Capes, some of us are Lunatics.
It should really be singular. I'm the lunatic.
Oh, you're the lunatic. Okay.
Yeah, I'm the lunatic.
Okay.
I love the moon.
Anyway, yeah, so I was doing my homework. I heard an older podcast with you. I've been trying to do some reading, so I was very interested. It's like, I guess you knew you always wanted to be a writer.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a curse and a gift, I guess. You know, at a certain point, you realize stories are something you can tell yourself by putting some words down, and I probably could still find some really god awful H.P. Lovecraft inspired, stories that I cobbled together, when I was very young and continued on and hopefully got better. But it's something I've always identified myself with, no matter what role I've had. Ultimately, I always call myself a writer.
And the most interesting thing from those early years I saw was I guess you were a big DC guy, not even a Marvel guy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was my brother had Marvel comics, and he at one point he had a subscription to a bunch of them, but they never struck a chord with me for whatever reason. Maybe I was too shallow, and I would when I would go on my comics run to not even a comic store at that point, but just the local newsstand, I would just come back with bags of DC comics, and I liked the characters, the universe, the environment, the Justice League, Phantom Stranger. I mean, these were characters that really resonated with me. The one letter I ever wrote to a comic was to Firestorm, and that was what my crude dresser drawer comic collection. I wasn't smart enough to have a comic boxes even. It was just I took all the clothes, stuck them in the closet, and then all the dressers in my room became just all the comics stacked and organized.
That's funny you say that. Yes, as a kid, I had at least 2 or 3 dressers.
Just the horror of it all. Appreciate your books, folks.
Oh yeah, no, but I mean, they were really well. They were their own space. Make no mistake. They definitely had everything organized, and the little dresser to the side was all the horror comics and the House of Mysteries and the Eries, and then over here was very particular. They were well cared for.
I mean, I'm sure
short boxes. I like it.
I mean, I'm sure I had a Daredevil drawer, Lilith, and I'm sure most of them in there were Mr. Chichester's here.
Make it Dan. Make it Dan.
Please. Okay, Dan. All right, Dan. I just remember, because when did you start? 91. I was 13 years old. I remember sitting by the neighborhood pool talking to some kids about, oh, did you see that last? Did you see issue 293 with the Punisher? Oh yeah.
That's great. I think it was 292, 293. Yeah, it was a good one to jump into. We had some good plans, and I think executed on a lot of them.
Oh yeah. And were you a big Batman fan growing up?
Yeah, I love Batman. I mean, Batman. Denny O'Neill's, Batman, I think was a big influence, especially as they were shifting things through. And then as I got more into comics, as many people do, you start to ply into the back issues, and then you start to discover even more of the stories that you missed the first time around. So I was lucky enough that my parents would indulge me as we'd go on road trips as I was a kid. And then we would find, again, not a comic store, but a used bookstore or that sort of thing that had piles of comics. There was one in Vermont, I remember really distinctly, Putney, Vermont, because we used to go for a lot of summer trips up there. And this used bookstore, thrift store, junk store, whatever it was, just had a basement full of comics. And I would always make them go out of their way to go there. And then I would come back with a new haul and new capture. And a lot of those were definitely Batman influenced.
I mean, I could tell, well, I don't know if I could tell, but I mean, I like the way I think I've never seen anyone else really do this. Like there are certain stories where you have Daredevil, Matt Murdock, kind of like almost whipping out the detective skills, just like especially with like the hypersensitive touch. It's like, oh yeah, why wouldn't you know?
I love the senses. I mean, the senses to me, became such a big part of who he is. And once you start to play there, you get into these whole ideas of what do you interpret from there. I mean, if you're looking at it from a character point of view, he's nowhere near the level of a detective as Batman is or should be. But there's definitely aspects of understanding what those senses mean. They did a lot of nice things. I just rewatched parts of the Netflix show, and they did some of that on there, I think, really well too, with those moments where he would hear, feel something, and then connect the dots. And I thought they handled that really well.
Yeah, I mean, again, I love your writing just with those senses, because I think a lot of times in the modern comics, they forget about some of those senses, or just, I mean, because even just setting the scene of things, like if something's on fire, and I know you had them, like, you could smell like the soot from the fire, and just
right.
All the senses combined, and it's just.
Yeah.
I think the word you're looking for is competent. He made him competent, and people love competent superheroes, especially
like
when
that,
they're more grounded.
I like that. Yeah, it's something to really play out. The one story, and we did a little bit of this. I wrote it. There was these Marvel digital comics toward the end of the '90s, or maybe the mid '90s, and they're called Cyber Comics. And I got a chance to do a Daredevil story in there that I had always wanted to tell in the book, which was really about a condition called synesthesia, where it's a mental condition where the individuals who have this, their senses are mixed up, so they feel colors. They see sounds, like it's cross-wired in that way. And I always wanted to play with that with Daredevil and have him get into a situation where those things became misfired and miswired. And we touched on it a little bit in the cyber comic, but I always thought that would be a good way to shake him up and then see how he could reconnect the dots in that way.
Better than another coma, I'll tell you that. Poor kid's got so much brain damage.
What do I need to do this month? Let me put the character in a coma. I can coast for a month,
But no, I mean, all right, Lilith, here's a question. You always say the Punisher's more competent when he's like playing off another character. I mean, do you think in these Daredevil issues, the Punisher's competent?
Well, as competent as he can be, as he's probably allowed to be. There's probably like some like status quo that they have to abide by and stuff. But I do like him. Like I said, Punisher team up. It makes more sense than a Daredevil team up at this point.
Daredevil and Punisher teamed up, or Punisher teammed up with anybody?
I think she thinks Punisher needs to team up, like Spider-Man used to have, just like because she thinks the Punisher's written better when he's always playing off a different character, whether it's Daredevil or Spider-Man or whoever.
I would agree with that. I mean, when I used the Punisher, it was always with somebody, and because he has such a particular worldview, you get to explore that worldview in a contrast with somebody else, which is always a way to not have him necessarily doubt himself. He's a machine in certain ways, but you get to explore the themes differently without him just having to doubt himself within his own world. But I always found that a rich territory when I got a chance to team him up with a lot of folks.
When Punisher's written well, it's just so good. And
yeah.
Not, it hurts my heart.
Well, it's easy to fall back on just, he's a guy with a gun and a revenge trip, and you don't get to go anywhere with it.
Exactly. The show on Netflix did such a great job with like the PTSD that a lot of veterans need to see so that they can get help and stuff like that. So it's just like, I'd like to see that more in the book,
Yeah, John Bernthal just personified that on so many different levels with that level of trauma. His body language, everything about that was unmistakably, the character.
And I'm glad that the TV show for Daredevil exists, because they definitely pulled from a lot of like the 90s stuff, which, my favorite era, not gonna lie. introduced a lot of people to the nuances of, his character. Like, it's not just, oh, he's blind and he wears a red suit. Oh, and he's a bad lawyer.
Yeah, so many. Well, that was the funny thing watching it. Me and my son, and just came to that conclusion of like, yeah, Foggy's a pretty awesome lawyer. Matt, he's got his moments, but
Poor Foggy.
I don't really know if I want Matt to be my lawyer anymore.
Do you watch the show like differently after you've written the character for so long? You're just like, or are you just like, oh, that's cool how they did that, or I don't know if I would have did that, or
It was a really good experience actually to watch the show and come back into it both as a professional, who'd worked on the character, and personally a little bit too, because my son was right at the age where he was finally getting to the point where he was enjoying the characters. He'd come up through a lot of the Marvel, cinematic universe stuff and be charged up about that. So earlier on, when Dad wrote comics, wasn't so interesting to him. Now suddenly Dad wrote comics. Here's a character Dad wrote. And while they didn't necessarily pick up on a lot of the things I did, there was at least, one or two. I had named the Chased, Styx group. And so then when they name checked that was nice. And while the costume, they ultimately gave him wasn't the costume that Scott McDaniel had designed, the whole theory we had behind that costume of like, you're gonna and I hope I can swear. Can I swear on your podcast? Is that okay if I just a little bit? You're getting the shit kicked out of you. It's okay if you got something aside from cotton on. And we took a lot of grief for that when we had that rationale in the Fall from Grace story. And so to have him show up in a not body armor, but something that was more protective was a little bit of a fun little validation. So I definitely watched it and appreciated what they were doing. I thought they did it extremely well, as opposed to, say the Ben Affleck, movie many years ago where it was like, you're trying to get through the day. Although I did like the shower scene in there with, where he's covered in blood and, he's spitting out his teeth and, it's just, he's gotten knocked around quite badly.
Yeah, well, speaking of that suit and Scott McDaniel, I mean, I love Scott McDaniel. Nightwing's like my favorite DC character over there, so I loved his run in the 90s on Nightwing.
Sure.
I've talked to other creators. Is there ever a thing, I don't know if it's all writers feel this, but it's like you write a story a certain way based on who you have drawing it?
Oh, absolutely. If you're in sync with the partner that you're working with, that's the best thing you do. And you learn about each other and you learn what you want to do, but also what you're good at. If if an artist hates drawing horses, and this is a very minor sort of thing, you don't suddenly put a Western scene in or out at the horse ranch. Some people do that, but you're not playing to the strengths of what somebody does, and you're also not playing to the interest they have. So once you get into a rhythm, and I had the good fortune working with some really talented people across a lot of the titles I worked on, and I think I was pretty simpatico with the relationships that we had. So you get into a rhythm, and you're able to play to those strengths. And with Scott especially, I think Scott kind of came into his own. If you look at when he came on the book, he had a certain style that he was trying out. Maybe it was a more, I would say, almost cartoony style, perhaps. And then when he began to explore the lines and the shadows and the weights, that he began really on the Fall from Grace story, and then he continued through the rest of our time working on the book, and then the Elektra title itself. I think he really I knew what he would do, right? I could write a scene, and because we had a level of understanding, I knew how it was going to come to life. So I could then give him certain things that I knew he would really turn into a terrific action or terrific emotion or whatever.
And also with Fall from Grace, I also heard like you had been planning for a while to bring Elektra back. Do you remember at the exact point? Was it the beginning of your run where you started thinking about bringing her back, or?
Well, Elektra was always out there, right? And it was the big thing that was always in conversation, and there was an unspoken, handshake deal, I think, between Ralph Macchio and who was the editor and Frank Miller, that Elektra would not come back. So we never pressed on it hard. Elektra was obviously a very strong character and a big part of Matt Murdock, Daredevil's existence in life. So every now and again, we'd sort of say, hey, what about doing something with Elektra? Maybe not. Let's leave that alone. Plenty of other things to kind of work with. But it was really, so there wasn't a big plan from, say, when we finish 300, let's start planning on bringing Elektra back soon for our next maybe big thing. But it was, as we started to think about what would become Fall from Grace, we're going to hit the 30th anniversary, right? By the time we hit Fall from Grace, at the end of that, what's a big thing we could do? And we were riffing on things. We're going to, of course, knock around Matt Murdock's life again, because why not? We're gonna do some, hopefully extraordinary things. We're gonna talk about a new, maybe look for it. Maybe this will be a springboard for some other ideas. And then in that conversation, actually, Ralph, I think, introduced the idea finally. We weren't pushing for it, and Ralph said, well, what about something, with Elektra? And we said, really? And then as we began to think about what the story could be, then that's really the timeline for that planning. So probably, whenever we started planning on that, 315, 314, around that time is really when the real planning began. That's when it probably came into real conversation. And to me, that's as much of what the title refers to, is her, as much as anything that happens to Matt.
So you put up that big signpost, yeah, because what was it, 314, where Matt's having the nightmare about Elektra. Okay.
Right,
so
right.
Telling us she's coming.
Yeah, exactly. Teasing something out.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm jumping around here.
No, I'm tracking. When you said you were going to go back and reread the things, I made sure I did as well. So I'm semi-familiar with my work at this point.
It's so much. You kids, but it's so much. Yeah.
And in the 90s, it's like,
yeah, you're one of like the most well-rounded kind of writers. You've been kind of like everywhere. That's something that I really appreciate.
Thank you, Lilith.
You're well-rounded at Marvel as well. Like, it's just a list. Like, do you like doing solo or do you like doing team stuff, or is it just a mood thing? With
characters, you mean, or with other
characters? With
characters. I think it really depends on the story you have in mind. Some really become lead to that natural partnership, and then you're going to play off things. Doing I don't know if you ever saw the Captain America Punisher story I worked on, Blood and Glory, but you could probably have told that story with either Cap or the Punisher, kind of solo, right? Finding this this hidden conspiracy, going after these drug lords and corrupt government officials and all this thing. Either one of them could probably tell that story, but once you start to think about them as soldiers and soldiers as people, then there's a real power to suddenly telling a story with two soldiers from different eras, and that's really what's driving the whole thing, as opposed to the plot device of the conspiracy and the danger and the war zones and such. So I think it really, I've had the good fortune to do both. I've had the good fortune to do really big, not team superhero books necessarily, but a lot of the horror work I did with a lot of the Clive Barker books, especially the Nightbreed stories. They had, it was an ensemble, of characters there. So that naturally, while there was one character, Cabal, who was the main one of the Nightbreed, it was very much about the whole Nightbreed, right? The book was called Nightbreed, so you had to think about them as a group, and that's where you come in. So to me, it's what's the story, and then you put your time to it.
So do you have a or is horror one of your favorite genres? Because it seems like, yes, you've worked in some horror stuff. You've even bring in the character Terror, that Dead Man's Hand.
Yeah. I think so. I think so. Yes, I will admit the truth. Yes, it's my real passion. And again, I think you go back to formative things and what you were really into earlier on, and then maybe you deviate away from it or take on other things. But Halloween was the national, holiday in my house. It was what we came up through. Horror in that world was all about, watching, great late night movies, reading stories. The most formative reading experience was when, this college aged, friend of my mother's, handed me my first Stephen King book and said, I think you might like this. And you don't give The Shining to an 11-year-old, but but me, but it all clicked. And certainly there's lots of elements, through there. Terror has some horror, not some horror elements. He has a lot of horror elements to him, although he operates as a mercenary.
Yeah.
I think sometimes I would, especially as I was working a lot on the Clive Barker material and a lot of the superhero stuff, every now and again I would kind of lose track of what I was doing, and I might try to introduce too many horror elements into the superhero universe. Ralph, I remember one story I turned in, and he was like, I think you've been spending too much time writing the Barker stuff. Redo this one. Which why he was such a great editor.
Oh, and also, I mean, a reoccurring villain that kept popping up early on, which I think certain writers either don't get this guy or just make him the butt of the joke sometimes. Tombstone.
Yeah, Tombstone was fun. Tombstone was badass. I mean, he was troubled and weird, and we tried to give him some motivations to what he was doing, as opposed to just this alabaster hitman. So he had a lot of great qualities, and I re-recognized that going back and reading some of the work there and seeing what I was able to do with him.
Oh yeah, because he started off your run. I love the stuff with the hand, but then of course, like you were talking about, I think around issue 300, you did the Fall of the Kingpin. You were the first guy that actually took down the Kingpin.
I know. How many times has he come down since then? Does he keep going? Here he's mayor now. I haven't read the recent one, so
yeah,
Tom Brevoort
right now. I mean that Marvel New York is so weird. I mean, for a while, J. Jonah Jameson was mayor. Now,
really?
Mayor? Yeah.
It's about as strange as the real New York. It's.
I was going to say, yeah. What's the difference right now?
Politics now, yeah.
Well, that was really my. I think that was the pitch. I think that got me the book, because when Ann Nesenti was leaving the title, then I heard about that in advance, or just as she had announced, but she hadn't left yet. And my good friend Steve Bucelato had said, you should try out for the book. And I didn't really know that I was ready to try out for a book like Daredevil, but the proposal I wrote really just started off with that idea. I said, we've danced this dance how many times? Matt Murdock goes right up to the line. Kingpin's right up to the line. It's fun. Those are nice scenes. There's a lot of tension and such, but they start to lose their energy after a point, because you can't make threats and then not follow through on them. So that was really the thing, to say, let's get rid of the Fat Man. Let's have him actually take it down. And that was the seeds I was trying to plant, even getting into those initial stories, right? Punisher, Ghost Rider, The Hand, these tough situations where tough characters were making extremely direct, aggressive, assertive decisions, right? Ghost Rider operates in this way. Punisher operates in this way. And not that Daredevil was going to become either one of those, but that's the moment of realization where he sort of says, all right, I've just been through this. I've just seen this. I'm not going to become those guys, but I'm going to aim all my competency, Lilith, at this problem and go right after it.
I mean, Fall of the Kingpin again, reading as a kid, I mean, before, the Hand sacrificing naked people in a nightclub, it didn't faze me for some reason, but then that first issue of Fall of the Kingpin, when he sleeps with Typhoid to take her out of play, I was like, whoa, this is some adult content. Yes.
I mean, that was like, I was talking with on a different, it wasn't a podcast. The guy did Steve Wilbur got together, me and Greg Wright, Mark McLaurin a few weeks ago, and we thought it was going to be an hour-long conversation, and it being like a 4-hour live stream, which was a lot of fun but exhausting. And we were talking a little bit about that scene, but that was one of those things where that wasn't in the proposal. Like, I didn't say I'm going to have to take down the Kingpin. I'm going to have Daredevil, sleep with Typhoid Mary. But I think those are one of those things that, as a writer, is like a gift that you get, from the universe or your brain, in the sense of, it was such a wild idea to have, such a daring idea, such a but if I was to think about it intellectually, I never would have done it. Right. I was able to do it because I was still new. I had some talent. And I just let the muse sort of take me in that direction in something that really worked logically, illogically, and paid off. I think if I thought too much about it, I would have backed off from it. Right. But it has that moment of saying right away, he is doing something that needs to be done to get to this end goal.
Oh yeah, I just took it. In this case, I guess the ends do justify the means, because it's like, he does get Mary the help she needs.
Exactly.
And two, it's like, I got to take the Kingpin down. How many lives I'm going to save taking down the Kingpin?
Right.
And I compliment your, big issue 300, big battle between Daredevil and the Kingpin.
Mm-hmm.
In the background, in what is that, the bus station, we see Peter Parker and Mary Jane. Big 300 issue. You could have had Spider-Man jumping in the fight. You didn't call it off. Peter Parker's just like, yeah, hit him for me.
Give him one for me.
Yeah.
That's the fun thing about the Marvel universe, right? Or any shared universe. If you've got some real moments like that, you can bring in the characters, and they don't have to suddenly become standalone, but you can have that nod to it, which I think you have to. Otherwise, you become very singular, and you forget about the rest of the world around you.
Oh yeah. But like I said, really good, and again, held back on that Spider-Man. You could have had the Spider-Man team up, although you did get to it eventually.
Yeah, we had a fun.
As everyone does.
As everyone does. The Spider-Man.
I'm pretty sure that's a secret mandate somewhere.
The Spider-Man office, I think, was right next to the Daredevil office, so that was there was always a lot of back and forth and discussion. We didn't actually have many mandates. Then it was. I think as time has gone on, and when I've talked to folks who are more involved than I am right now, which would be at all because I'm not involved with that world, but I think there's been a lot more dictation of your story will go in this direction, or you will go in this direction. The only time we had that was, maybe some of the major crossovers that were going on across everything, and we had to do a nod to it, but. We would want to use characters because they were interesting, or sometimes they were sales boosts, right?
I was going to say, let's face it, it was the 90s, so like the Punisher, Spider-Man, Ghost Rider,
absolutely, X-Men,
eyes on the book.
Yep. I mean, that was a challenge we always had, and that was a lot of dramatic conversations with the PR folks and the marketing folks about, listen, we're not a spider, we're not a mutant. What do we need to do to get some attention on this book? And then sometimes that did lead to, like the Dead Man's Hand story was manufactured in a sense of, listen, if we do a story like this and we cross over some of these characters, will you guys do a little bit more of a push? Oh yeah, we'll do that. And then we did it, and I think we got a little poster out of it, but it didn't really get the push, but it was a fun story, and those are fun people to work with. I mean, they were, Fabian was Chuck Dixon. We all went out to lunch. We all just sat down and we just kind of mapped out. Here's a story. Here's the people we want to use. You'll end your piece there. I'll pick up the baton here, and we all got along, so it was easy to hash something like that amongst ourselves.
I thought it came out really well. I mean, yeah, Daredevil, Punisher, and Nomad in Lil's favorite town, Las Vegas.
Yeah. It was, and that was a chance, in that particular story. I remember was right at the opening. I think I had Matt just going, bugging out because the sensory overload of Vegas, and I had not actually been to Vegas at that point, but having finally gotten to Vegas like 4 years ago or so. I definitely
sanitized Vegas.
Well, I definitely heard the sensory overload even in some of the places I went into.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah, because like in was it 2007? I flew out to Vegas for my cousin's wedding, and like the minute I landed, I started feeling like I wasn't feeling right, and I was thinking, oh no,
they pump your oxygen into that airport.
Right.
So it's a whole thing to get you ready to spend money in Vegas.
When I went to Vegas, I went the wrong way. We'd gone on like a 2-week road trip through the Southwest, so we spent a lot of time in the desert, Moab, Grand Canyon. We were in all these outdoor places, and then we finally looped around to Vegas, which was, cool to see. But we should have gone the other way, right? Start in Vegas, then go out into the great unknown and kind of cleanse ourselves.
See, that was the problem with me. I think I flew out. What was it, like October? It was October here in the Northeast. It was like 50 degrees. I fly out there, it's 80 degrees.
Oh yeah.
It just felt completely different. Let's see, what else did I want to ask?
Am I gonna have to be the one to ask about Daredevil Batman? Fine, I'm gonna be the one.
No, go for it.
How the heck did that come about?
How the heck? Well, a Daredevil Batman team up was something I think anybody would want to do, right? At that point, there hadn't been one, so it was definitely a nice brass ring to kind of go after. I think it was, it was just a conversation and a proposal, and saying, why wouldn't we want to put these two characters that have there's always been somewhat comparisons to them. Some of the comparisons to them, I think, also have to do with the fact Frank Miller, worked on both and did extraordinary work on both. But they had that sense of they are stitched into their cities. They are kind of operating often at night. They play out in a more natural, hard setting. So there's a lot of
the mob ties and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of natural, qualities to that, and so it was something I was leaning, I think, pretty hard into to try to just get going, saying, why can't we do something? Here's a proposal. Here's an idea. Here's a team. At one point, I had been hoping to actually reteam with Lee Weeks on that, and we talked a lot about that. Ultimately, Lee decided it wasn't for him at that time. And then it was a lot of conversations, and that wasn't an easy one to crack the code on, just in terms of very high profile characters, especially Batman, and how do you handle him and what do you do with him? And so there's a lot of conversations with not just Ralph Macchio as the Daredevil editor, but Denny O'Neil as the Batman editor, and what do you do with these? And my first swing of that story, that got thrown out. I mean, by me. I mean, it was just I think I hit send on it or faxed it at that point, probably. and almost as soon as I did it, I called Ralph and said, read it if you want, but I don't like it. It's not doing it for me. And then went back in, and I think going back in is then when we started to find the interesting qualities of
that Harvey Dent angle was
exactly that was the second pass, Lilith. That was discovering that made the story, right? And that was the piece, to really play out in a more interesting way.
It's a shame comics like that won't get made anymore, because I'd love to see a number 2.
Yeah, why do you think they don't want to play ball with each other anymore and do those?
It's just the corporate atmosphere at this point. Everybody wants to stay in their own corner.
I would imagine. I mean, I think there's just because now both are, when that was done, they were owned by corporations. Certainly, DC was owned by Warner Brothers at that point. Marvel was owned by whoever, but I think the operations were still more, maybe just interoperational. And there were also a lot more people, maybe there are now, but there were certainly people there who knew each other and had worked with each other, right? Denny had been at Marvel. Yeah. Ralph and Denny, had worked together. Mark Greenwald and Mike Carlin, were thick as thieves, fast friends. So, when somebody said, hey, let's do an amalgam universe, or let's do, these kind of intercompany crossovers, it was based as much on friendships and relationships that had already existed as anything else. So that certainly would enable that type of thing to happen a lot quicker.
All right, Lilith, I got to go there. You brought up the magic. You brought up the magic name. I'm a huge fan of Mark Greenwald. The biggest regret in my life is I'll never be able to interview him.
Yes.
So you worked with Mr. Greenwald?
Mark, I wish I'd worked with Mark more. And Mark intimidated me, and he should not have, because he's a gem of a person, and a very giving and hysterical, person, in in the way he operated. But I was a little bit intimidated by him because I didn't know him very well, and he could be very, I guess, stoic in certain ways on the outside. So I was like, I can't play in this guy's, field. So I didn't approach him as much as I should have and learn more from him. But all that said, one of the first real stories I took a swing at, not a goofy inventory story or a licensed story like, here's my Thundercats idea, was for a book he had done called Solo Avengers, right? So these were short stories, 10-page stories, maybe 11-page stories. So it was like half a book. It wasn't even a full book. And he, I think, had come up with the idea specifically to help up-and-comers do more work. So I was writing with a woman named Margaret Clark at that point, and we pitched this Dr. Druid story, right? Dr. Druid, if he's still around, was sort of a Doctor Strange also ran, right? Mm-hmm. And we wrote this kind of story, and Mark came in. We were on staff at that point. We were editors in the Epic Comics line. And, Mark came in and spent an inordinate amount of time going over this 11-page story and telling us what works, what doesn't work, if we want to take a swing at it, what to, he wasn't going to buy the story then, but if we wanted to go back and think about these things. So to me, this was like, oh my gosh, this guy is like, he doesn't have to do this, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, that was a passion, not just for comics, characters, even minor ones, but also, for people. And so that was my big attempt, to work with him. I think I got to work with him on West Coast Avengers, where I did a story with them as well, and he gave us, good guidance on that. And then as the practical Joker in the office, he allowed us to pull, some crazy stunts on some of his assistants and such now and again.
That's what I keep hearing. He was the practical jokester.
Oh yeah. I mean, he would run game shows at in the office, at the conventions. If any, you ever seen any of the conventions in that time, there were always over the top, on stage, Marvel versions of different game shows, and he would be the instigator and usually the ringmaster around that stuff. But a real, he's often been referred, I'm sure you've seen this before, is the kind of the soul of Marvel. The soul of the passion for the characters. The sense of irreverency that probably everybody thinks is happens in the Marvel bullpen. This was a guy who really personified so much of that. So true loss.
Oh yeah. But back to your stuff. I think a lot of the stories I had loved from you are the ones that don't get the attention they deserve. Like like the day in the life stuff. Like issue 304 and 316, where Matt Murdock just like takes like a chunk of time and just like. You just get like montages of him like going through the city or going through the subway, just like helping people.
Thanks for noticing that. Yeah, 304 is one of my favorites. And when I was writing Daredevil, even once I moved out of the city, I continued to get a subscription to New York Newsday, which at that point was one of the, I think, best in-city newspapers, and no longer exists. And I would collect just these little bits, guy, gets into a traffic altercation, fight at a bar with a chainsaw, these little things. And, no one of them was a story unto itself. Mm-hmm. But really, and then the one thing that was that trigger point for 304 was a story that had said, we just went 36 hours without a murder in New York City. Like that was like the headline in Newsday or something like that. And I said, wow, 36 hours without something like that. What could Daredevil do in those 36 hours? And then, get this stack of all these other little incidents, and how can you, go through and actually, map out what he could influence and touch before the next big explosion of murder or real menace. So many of those incidents in that story were things I saw, had read about in one form or another, and just figuring ways that he could kind of come in and out of it was a nice choreography. And then the subway story was trying to do that again. I don't think I pulled that off quite as nicely, but it was definitely a way to sort of see how he, how he's in touch with the city.
No, I mean, I love both those stories, and I mean, 316. I mean, I think it's a credit to your writing. It's like it's a great story, and it's like I don't know. Sometimes if you read it for the first time, you don't even realize you're like, oh man, he didn't even put on the costume this whole
Right. Yeah, I think at the end didn't. I think like Ralph and I think Pat Garrett, he was the assistant editor at that point. They were like, "Well, here's a pinup of Daredevil because you never saw the costume the whole issue." You know?
But that's what I just love about like street level characters. It's like, yeah, you can fight supervillains, but you can do like these small like character piece stories and stuff. You know, just
right. And that's the thing I think I was thinking about Daredevil, at least to me, was, you know, he's struggled with, okay, there was, of course, the conflict between the lawyer and the vigilante, but, you know, unlike some characters where, well, you know, you've heard there is no Bruce Wayne, only Batman, or Bruce Wayne is the disguise for Batman, or you know, there is no, or there's a big demonstrable shift, you know, between the two when they put the costume on. You know, I think there was a lot more overlap, for me at least, with Murdoch is Daredevil and Daredevil is Murdoch.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that was, you know, so he could become and do what he did no matter what. I remember writing the last issue of Daredevil I wrote, which was many years after, you know, I stopped the regular run when Tim Toohey had invited me and Lee Weeks back to write a story that was the end of the first volume, right? It was before Joe Quesada was coming in. And so we did this big sort of Unusual Suspects inspired story of all these explosion on this big ship and all this stuff. But I remember writing in a courtroom scene, Matt Murdock saying something and being a competent lawyer for a change. But, you know, originally I think I was writing it, you know, he said something articulately, or he said something in, you know, in a very nice way, or soothing voice. And then I said, this isn't right. This guy's voice, if I hear it in my head, puts you on edge. You know, he's a daredevil. Even the way he speaks in court, you know, has to be some quality of you know, what he's doing. And I think that's something else that the TV show got right in how they did it. You know, he's a bit of a mess even when he's walking around. You know, he never really shaves. He's like, you know, he's
like we say, poor Foggy's got a lot of mess to clean.
Poor Foggy carries a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and and again, another one of those stories, the 2-part 312 and 313, that when the pizzeria arson, when he trying to clear that girl's name and trying to find out who really, you know, it's like a mystery. And again, you get the lawyer part, you get the vigilante part, but I mean, really good story. And it's just like, yeah, again, there's no supervillains. There's just a list of suspects. And
yeah, you know, rereading it, it was like I was wondering to myself, like, why didn't I make this a super villain, or like, you know, some villain with you know, ferocious fire powers or something. But then you know, the mindset at that point was, well, this is exactly what you picked up on, right? It's that sense of he's living the city, he's living the street. So it was perfectly in line with what we were trying to do at that time.
And again, even just like what we were saying about the Spider-Man team up, I mean, I guess, could you categorize the Surgeon General as a super villain? But I mean, she was basically just someone like stealing people's organs. Yeah.
I love the Spider-Man stuff in that story, and I think that was the Barker one that, you know, I was mentioning that Ralph threw the script back at me. Like, do this again, you know, because and you know, there was a lot of that urban myth body organ harvesting, you know, storylines probably going around at that time in the media, and you know, she had super villainous qualities. Certainly she, you know, putting herself in that outfit and acting in that way. But there was definitely a little too grisly for my taste now in looking back at it. But the Spider-Man stuff was a lot of fun to do.
I mean, it was a little different, especially if like you're like a Spider-Man fan. But I mean, it was good. I always love it because, you know, they have to go trolling through the nightclubs.
Yeah, I know. Those, you know, recruiting Peter Parker was a lot of fun there.
I know. He's just like, yeah, you're good looking. We'll throw you in the nightclubs. And then, you know, in pure Clark Kent fashion, Peter just like slaps on a mustache as a disguise.
I'm pretty sure it was like something. that I don't know if we and Scott talked about that, or maybe he just like threw that in there, and that would have been one of the things once you start to get into a rhythm with somebody, they start to just trade things with you, and that was because a lot of the Daredevil issues, in fact, all the Daredevil issues, were probably written in Marvel style, where you write them as a plot. My plots were fairly detailed, so I'd give all the beats, but it was then the artist was interpreting a lot of things. So sometimes you get back things you didn't expect, and they might add a detail, or they might break what you thought was going to be one panel into 2 panels, or 4 panels might become a splash page. So sometimes your script in your head, changes, and sometimes becomes a lot more fun by that discovery.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially you and Scott McDaniel. I mean, even Lee Weeks, but I mean, just tell the machine was working well because the art was great, and you get, like I said, you got so descriptive with those senses. You really build a scene. The sounds, the smells.
That's great. I'm really thank you for again noticing that and checking it. I really appreciate that.
Oh yeah, and then again, we talked about Fall from Grace, and then right after Fall from Grace, you went no slowing down. You went right into another big story, the Tree of Knowledge. So
yeah,
I guess were you a big computer guy?
I was. I mean, yeah, I was definitely getting your influences. Definitely flow into the things you're working on, right? So I mean, that was a burgeoning aspect of whatever sub-society at that point. Now it's clearly where we're living, full on, and looking at that, again, recently on some things. It wasn't like I was projecting the future, but I think there's a whole scene between Cap and Daredevil talking about digital rights and privacy and such, and it's still a conversation we're being affected by now. But I was a big fan of like Mondo 2000, which was a magazine about the future then. Wired magazine had just come out. And so, seeing those aspects, can you play those out and make them part of the street? And there was a lot of discussion in the things I was reading about how hackers, were street level characters in a way. It's certainly like a William Gibson cyberpunk, aspect to that. So it felt really interesting to play that out, and that whole group, the whole System Crash, set of villains. I enjoyed the hell out of them, a lot. I would like to have done more with them, I think, or bring back some aspect of them if I continued on, playing with them later. But it got me a nice little write-up in Wired magazine at one point. Actually, I was reading this little mini review of a comic book, and I'm saying, wow, that sounds really familiar. And then they got to the end of it and said, oh, it's Daredevil by and I was like, oh yeah, I wrote that.
But yeah, I like that story just because it was like all about, the technology of the future, and then you contrasted it with Captain America,
Yep.
Basically the man from the past, and it's just like,
yeah, it was a lot of really fun discovery with that, and I think some good villains, some good scenes, some good outwitting of the situations, even playing with some of the villainous characters there. I remember giving them a little bit more dimension than just simply, oh, they're all Hydra, Von Struckers, automatons.
Yeah, that group was good, but the Snake Root from Fall from Grace, I thought, was
oh yeah,
one of the best threats you came up with in your run. Yeah,
thanks. Yeah, they were a lot of fun to work with, and just I think about the amount of research I try to put into those things to draw them out. And I remember borrowing Ninja books from Carl Potts, who was very knowledgeable about that whole era and type of fighting style and group, and thinking through what do we need to do to bring characters with these specialties to life, and certainly that research paid off at the end of the Root of Evil story. That whole idea of dipping the armor in poison and poisoning your enemies, as you fight, was a very real ninjutsu move that they would sort of like play out and things. So, it's not like just recasting what they could do, but being inspired by it. I that storyline especially, and that Snake Root group and what they went through, and that felt to me like it hit on all cylinders then. And again, looking at it recently, I'm really, really proud of having played that out.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, really good. I thought that was one of the biggest threats you came up with. And then the end of your end. Well, I don't know where was. I mean, I know the credits and stuff, and the end. No, the end of the run. It's like, so you didn't know you were no longer.
Yeah, I've been dancing around this for years in no real hidden way, right? Alan and I talk now and again. I like Alan a lot. Alan's a good friend of mine. I don't know why Alan did what he did. But yeah, I mean, it was for whatever reason and whatever cowardice, chicanery, whatever motivations were, right? I was the writer on the book. I was actually talking actively about spinning off other Daredevil titles. We had other Daredevil mini projects we were talking about doing, and then I was told by the person who was editing Daredevil at that time that the new editor-in-chief of Daredevil, because at that point Marvel split itself up into 5 editor-in-chiefs, and there were 5 different groups, right? There was the mutant group, there was the maybe I can't remember what the other one was, but Daredevil fell into kind of like the street level hero group, right? The Punisher, Daredevil, other characters like that. So the editor who I was working with, called me because I'd known her for a long time and said, yeah, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but you're off the book. And I said, how am I off the book if you can't tell me about it? So it was this kind of weird, maybe he'll just go away sort of thing. And of course, I didn't own the book. It's work for hire. On one level, that's all what kind of happens, but you would expect there to be a discussion of something. At least that's the way I would have handled it when I was an editor. So, I was partway into that story and what would become, the cruel story. And I was, I wanted to finish it off. They gave me the option to finish it off. I could use the money. But at the same time, I was probably just feeling like this isn't going to be a great story. It's not going to go anywhere. And Alan Smithy, for folks who don't know, was typically the credit a director would put on a film when the director no longer felt that film had turned out the way they liked. So it's kind of like the Hollywood credit that goes on a film when the director feels the film's been taken away from them or has turned out in a way and they don't want their name associated with it. So I put it on there as a kind of and for that reason, but also because, I had a film school background. So I was being a little too clever for myself. But looking back at the story recently and rereading it, I'm like, you know what? I pulled off probably a lot of what I wanted to pull off. I think probably where it doesn't come together is, well, what would come next, right? Yeah. What would have come next in terms of putting the Kingpin back in this position with the quote unquote new Daredevil, or all these things that these other characters had now rediscovered about themselves from that terrible night in that diner. What would we have done with that? And I'm sure I had ideas for that and would have played that out and not just let it be like kind of like a one note thing. But when you're halfway through something that you think is going to lead to the next thing, because bringing the Kingpin back in at that stage was certainly starting to set the stage of him becoming not the full Kingpin in the penthouse again, but what is he going to do now? How's he going to start to play his street level magic? But then, you're halfway through and you're like, all right, do I want my name on this? Do I not want my name on this? And so I said no, but now it really doesn't. I don't know why I did that.
Yeah, I remember I didn't find out about Alan until years later, because I remember first reading it and I was like, who is this Alan guy? He's trying to be Chichester in the worst way.
Yeah, maybe that's it. That's exactly right. Yeah. So like there's moments of it that are me, right? Mm-hmm. But probably my heart was not fully in it. And so again, I think it's a reasonable story, reasonably executed, but not with the same level of passion and sort of knowing that this is leading to one more thing.
So you don't remember what plans you would have you had if you had kept going?
Well, I know that the Kingpin would have become more of a powerful street level operation. That was certainly one thing that we were going to continue to do in the book, and then have him form a new relationship with this new Daredevil. That was certainly, what was going to be happening there. I remember that we had talked about 2 specific mini series that we were going to do. One was going to be because when Ralph Macchio was still the editor, and before it had transferred over into this new universe of editors, we had talked about almost like a Daredevil grouping. We could always have like a couple 3 Daredevil stories going, and one of them was almost a Daredevil year 2. John Romita Jr. and Frank Miller had done Daredevil year 1 in a way, but we were saying, okay, so now what happens? Like, what do you do now? So we talked a lot about that, and then I had this really keen idea. I thought that I was going to do with an artist, Paul Ryan, which was essentially a Daredevil time travel story, where we were going to send Daredevil back to, and I knew exactly how we were going to do it. Get him back. I wasn't sure how we were going to get him back to the future, but I knew how we were going to get him back there with some like ruptured Fantastic Four gadgetry. But we were going to send him back to old New York in the 1800s. There was a corrupt organization at the level of the city government run by a guy named Boss Tweed, who essentially was the real life Kingpin. And so we were going to send him back to this time era and have him have to confront that. And that was another opportunity, I thought, to play with the senses, because the New York of that era was, rife with the stink of slaughterhouses coming off the river and the whole different shape and form of the city. So it would have been his city, but it would have been a nice place to play with the senses, have him confront a villainous character who he would recognize a lot of things from in terms of being very Fisk-like, but a lot of new situations. And he was going to, the time travel, I remember, was going to send him back like Terminator-like, naked and stripped of everything. So he was going to have to fashion an 1800s kind of look for himself. And it was, I remember a lot of great thinking about it, but it all went up, into Alan Smithy smoke. And
and I was going to say, was the quote unquote new Daredevil going to stay around for a while? Because I know after you left, pretty much by 350, they had brought Matt Murdock back.
Oh, I didn't read a lot of that stuff. I love Mark DeMatteis to death. I think he's a fantastic writer. I understand the whole thing was like kind of gotten rid of very quickly as like a delusional activity or something like that. It was passed off really, really fast. Yeah, I mean, there definitely was a plan, to shift things around and bring Matt back into it, because the point of the Batlin character, the Jack Batlin character, as a true mask, right? And that he's wearing for, that reason of a guy protect my friends, a little bit of a trope in comics or whatever. But the point of it was to actually have him realize, I need the lawyer to be the vigilante. Yes. And I need the vigilante to be the lawyer that I can be. So by not being the lawyer, right, and being this sort of, the Jack Batlin character was a little bit of a street level grifter and trying to get his sensibilities from things there, was for that realization to happen and realize he had to be Matt Murdock as well. So there was definitely a legitimate plan for that to have meaning to him and to the story. But we obviously never got to that. Brian never got to that.
Yeah, Jack Batlin was very interesting because like Matt was like trying to pretend to be a sighted person.
Yeah. That was fun, and yeah, seeing things and trying to play it out there, as opposed to the the usual opposite. But I guess nobody wanted to track in that direction, or they just wanted to get back to, well, Matt Murdock's Daredevil. This whole other thing is too much to play out. So there was a quick solution, I guess.
Well, I guess after they brought him back, they kind of lightened up the character for a while too. So I don't know if he was almost like a, I don't know, like a Spider-Man sense of humor, but I mean they took it more in that direction almost. Yeah,
I know there was some, I want to say, a little bit goofy stuff, and I know when Tim Toohey called me and Lee on that 380, I said, well, where are we at right now? I haven't really followed the character very much. And he said, good, I don't want any of that. I want what you and Lee did. And that's why I want you guys to, like, no one really cares right now what I do with this last issue. But I care. Tim cared. And he says, I want you guys to do what you did then. And Lee took a little bit of convincing, because, Lee is a fantastic creator and artist, and had been doing much of his own stuff, both with other writers and his own writing, where he's really good at. And initially he was like, well, this feels like I'm going backwards a little bit, which Lee has never gone backwards. But so we talked about what we could do and what we could play out in it, and what it would mean for us and the character that had really, been a big jumping off point for both of us, both, I think, as creators and getting better, and as friends and partners. So that I remember that, that wasn't an immediate done deal for him, but I'm delighted that it finally, clicked in our heads. As one of my favorite stories.
Okay. Well, before we let Dan go, Lilith, do you have anything else?
Okay, I just have to know, because this is actually how I originally discovered you when I was younger, spinning Doomsday's web. Like, it's like two things you wouldn't think to put together, but two characters I love.
I have this gigantic Black Widow thing right here next to me with that story in it. So
yeah, like, where did that come from? I personally enjoy it. Like I said, it's two things I didn't know I wanted until it was in my face, and I'm like, yeah, obviously, this is great. One of the best Punisher kind of like team up things that I don't hear a lot of people talk about.
No, that was a really fun story to put together. There were definitely like lots of. I'm going to take the cellophane off this finally. There's lots of there were certain graphic novel like projects that was originally like its own little graphic novel sort of thing. And I think it was probably more initially a Black Widow story, right? A bit of a spin-off of the spy work I was doing with Nick Fury and Shield and playing her out. But as we were talking about before, sometimes you get a chance to craft a better story about a character when they have a foil to play off of. So bringing the Punisher in may have been probably a little bit of, all right, Black Widow's popular-ish, but Punisher's popular. So why don't we use him as a way to draw more attention to this? But it's definitely her story, right? She's the one who really goes through.
Like, she's all style, grace, finesse, and there's just this big blockhead Bruce.
Yeah, exactly. She's like skill in espionage, and he's like a wrecking ball. But that was a combination of thinking about the characters, and also again having a little bit of a clip file of things that someday you want to do something with, but you don't know what to do with them yet, right? So that whole doomsday device, right, that's in that story, that whole I think a ramjet, right, a giant flying crowbar that sucks in air and turns it into nuclear energy and spits it out the back and irradiates and the land and turns into a wasteland. It was an actual thing. It wasn't something like I made up. It was a project called, and I think I name check on the story, Project Pluto. And so, you get these moments and you say, there's a story here and a plot at least. And so, putting the two together, as you say, gives you contrast. If there was another wrecking ball character you put together with the Punisher, that's not much of a story. But when you combine them, as the way you said, it becomes something where you get that contrast and you get to build out. So that was a lot of fun to do. I always wish Larry Stroman had given me the one shot I wanted of the inside of the plane that sort of showed like the mechanism. That was the one damage of like writing things in plot style, which I described it, but then when I got it back, it was a shot of the Punisher and Black Widow looking into the plane, but not seeing the plane itself. So I think there's actually like a word balloon that is literally the Punisher saying, Black Widow, do you see what I see? Yes. Yes, Punisher. The inside of the plane is a bomb. But those are the moments where you get creative.
That's chef's kiss. Honestly, like I said, I like a lot. Obviously, I like the Punisher stuff you do because I just like that take that you had for him, making him
Thank
competent,
you.
but like also keeping that frankness of being, that blunt blockhead, one man on a mission kind of guy.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. I love this competent word. I'm going to be using this a lot for the thinking about these
modern
characters.
comics. The heroes are not competent,
How do you?
I don't believe you actually got those guys in that web, Spidey. I don't know.
Really? Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, a lot of the stuff I'm reading nowadays is not the mainstream stuff. I'm reading like Sweet Tooth and a lot of other publishers. So is that you finding that's a common thing that the characters, the heroes, don't seem like they?
I don't believe it. They're not believably competent, or
really?
The big two are suffering from it. They just do what they want to do, event after event. It's just like, wait a minute, did we ever wrap up? Nope. Okay.
I picked up, and this is no ding on the creators, but it was just unusual to me because I picked up Batman. Is it Metal? Was it where it was?
I have my feelings about that.
Oh yeah, Dark Knight.
What, right? All these alternate like evil Batman Jokers or whatever. And I know Batman, like we talked about that, just a little while ago. I love Batman, and I know Batman's history, and I know Batman's this and that and the other thing. I couldn't follow that story for love nor money. I mean, it was so, maybe it was the competency aspect too, but it was so inside its own universe that
it was unrecognizable.
I couldn't get into it. I was like, I can't follow what's going on here. And I read and write sometimes very complicated things. So I don't mind stories that kind of need a little bit of unpacking, but it felt like it was, maybe it's a very plot driven approach to things. Maybe that's an output of, if indeed inside these companies, there is, dictates of what you can and can't do, or you have to get here or there with crossovers. I don't know.
I just feel like just go back to the 90s, start fresh. Let's take that kind of attitude. It's just, I don't know. Maybe it's just the nostalgia.
We didn't really think about it then, but you'd go into an editor's office and you'd pitch something, and they would say, "Yeah, okay, do that." And it wasn't, I cannot think. Maybe I was just lucky, but I cannot think of many instances where it was very manufactured in that way. There was a little bit of that on some of the Midnight Suns. The horror line of characters, Ghost Rider, Night Stalkers, Morbius, that was sort of trying to become its own little sub-universe. But by and large, we'd go in with a story. What do you think of this? That sounds pretty cool. Do that. And then if you had a good editor, and I was lucky, I think I did, they'd help you course correct and brighten up the dull spots and make sure that you stayed on target for what you promised to do in the story. But
deadlines.
Well, too, do you think there's not as much interaction between the writers and the editors anymore, especially like face to face, especially this year?
Well, this year we're all stuck right in this. I don't know, Phil. I don't have that inside track. I remember meeting a couple of years ago for just coffee with one well known creator who's still in the business, and he was saying he was feeling everything he was doing was very dictated to, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of like, this is, we're kind of told what the story has to be and where it has to go. And he was clearly a bit frustrated by it. Now, he might've been an N of one, but he was is a big name. And so I was kind of surprised to hear that from somebody of his caliber, because I would think if anybody's going to have carte blanche, it's going to be a guy like this. But I don't know about, because even you have to figure, some of us who were in the New York City area, which I live in Connecticut. So, and at the time I was doing a lot of the Marvel stuff, I was either in the city initially, or I moved upstate New York a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly folks like us could get into the offices. But that wasn't everybody. There were certainly many creators, across the country, and they would deal by phone or FedEx at that point. And a lot of great stories came out of it. When I was an editor at Epic Comics, and I did a lot of the work, I was with Brits. I'd worked with a lot of the British creators. So those guys were in a different time zone across an ocean. And you were able to get a lot of stuff going. So I don't know if it's I don't know if that it's distance necessarily so much as it's the way people are coming at it, or it becomes insular, right? That's always a danger, I think, with, when I worked with Archie Goodwin, who was the lead of Epic Comics, and I worked with a lot of, like you were saying, Greenwald, like really, big folks. A lot of these people had also come from other places, right? They had other influences. They loved comics, and so they put all their experience and channeled it only on comics. Sometimes if all you've ever done is comics, and then you're channeling only stuff at comics, that could become maybe inside baseball. I don't know. I'm guessing.
There's still good stuff all around, and like I said, there's other companies, and you kind of run the gambit of those companies back in the day. So.
Oh yeah, I wanted to work anywhere I could, and try to get as many things going, and from Classics Illustrated to Moby Dick with Bill Sienkiewicz to Hercules adaptation for Disney Comics. I mean, it was it's.
I love your Dark Horse work in the Steel Harbor section.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm actually trying to get a new project going with Carl Waller, who I did a lot of the work with Dark Horse with. So fingers crossed on something happening there.
Yeah, keep us abreast of that news for sure.
I will.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that's a nice segue. So I was going to ask you what you're working on now or what's coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it's I segued out of comics, for the most part, in the early 2000s, really. Probably the last thing I did was around 99, or so. A couple small stories for some independent things that never, I think, came out. I did some stuff for some anthologies. Mostly, I mean, the work I've really done now for the last stretch of time has been a lot of writing and advertising work there. But just recently in the last couple of years, an idea that Carl and I had many years ago, and it's a bit of a horror influence. Somebody described it, which I think I'm going to steal, as the Good Place meets From Dusk Till Dawn. And
go on, you have my attention.
And
we'll perk up a good place.
And it's this idea we had. Carl had come to me with this crazy idea. He says, "Yeah, I'm thinking truckers and dimensional portals, and maybe there's a stripper in there somewhere." Carl's a great, just like kind of like free association guy. And I'm listening to him on the phone many years ago, and I'm like, "Carl, good conversation. I don't know where this goes, but thanks for calling." And then I sat down, and it was like, you suddenly feel like you got this Hamilton moment of like, your pen is like attached to your brain, and something else is channeling its way through. And so I write this whole concept out about this, this what could those interdimensional things be? What are those truckers delivering? Where are they delivering them? Is there some kind of infernal aspect to it? Because I like horror. Somebody hijacked into the service of this delivery system, this, FedEx system for the most evil parts of the universe. And I write this whole thing out almost straight out. And it clicks. And me and Carl are loving it. And then we sort of lost touch. Like it didn't grab hold. And then we reconnected a couple of years ago, and the first words out of both our mouths were like, "You remember that thing?" And it was really weird that it had actually stayed with both of us. And I've become a big fan of this idea that ideas are like actual ethereal genie-like things, and they will visit themselves upon you. And if you're not smart enough to do something with them, they're going to go on to somebody else. And so I said to Carl, "This thing stuck with us for a reason. If we don't do something with it now, this is our last chance to do it. Somebody else is going to go. It's going to go and visit somebody else." So we've been working on it, and I've written like a 5-issue first story arc, and I'm working on a second issue 6-story arc, and he's going to design the characters and lay the pages out. And so we're going to start shopping around to publishers or Kickstarter it, hopefully within the next, set of months or whatever, to see if there's some mojo that can happen there. So definitely I'll give you guys a heads up if that's happening, and appreciate a mention if that is the case, and maybe when it becomes real, we could chat again.
Oh yeah, definitely with the mentions and the chatting again, definitely. But if anyone else wants to keep up with what you're doing, where should they follow you? Social media or website?
Yeah, I mean, I'm semi-active on social media, but if stuff is kind of going on, I think probably the best place is, Twitter is great, and just DG Chichester is my handle there. You can go to my website, which is capitalistfiction.com, but it's really, that's just kind of like a holding place. It's kind of like a portfolio for a lot of my work. It's not very active, but if you follow me on Twitter, then as some other things are starting to kick into gear, that would be a great place to see. I'm starting a newsletter with some of the stuff that I'm talking to Carl about, probably in the next couple months. And that would be a good place to, if folks are interested, jump on and sign up and get some inside talk and some ideas about writing and such.
All right. And before we let you go, I know Lilith will kill me if I don't ask this.
Lilith sounds very dangerous. You're
you have no idea. You have no idea. Let me get a quick drop of you saying this is DG Chichester and you're listening to the Capes and Lunatics podcast.
Absolutely. This is DG Chichester and you're listening to the Capes and Lunatics podcast.
Oh, perfect.
Awesome. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, you've been a great guest. Thank you so much for coming.
Terrific. Are you both in the same semi-location, or did you guys meet? Since
I'm in Florida.
You're in Florida.
I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm like right outside Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Okay. But how did you guys? Just curious. Like, did you guys know each other before you started the show, or?
No, I had him on one of my old podcasts, and we kind of just started doing our own thing over here at Southgate Media. So
she basically just put that call out on Twitter. Yeah, back what was that, like 2014 or something? She's like, "Oh, I need a guest for a podcast," and I was like, "Oh, come on, I've never done a podcast before."
Before you know it.
Yep.
That's the best way. Sometimes, things just click that way in synchronicity, and it's great.
Oh yeah. All right, but yes, thank you so much for taking a Saturday morning to talk to us.
My pleasure.
Enjoyed this and.
Good. Looking forward. Now, was this going out live as you were doing this, or you guys are going to edit this and post it?
We do the live thing, but then this will be edited for the podcast later.
Marvelous. All right, yeah. Shoot me a note when
we'll let you know when it's live.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
A lot of fun. Have a great rest of the weekend, guys.
Thank you. You too. Thank you so much.
You bet. My pleasure. Take care.
That was great.
It was. And we're still live.
I know we're still live.
Okay. I'm just reminding you.
I'm the one that's going to be cursing up the storm. Hellfire. All right. So should we get out of here then?
Yes, let's.
But yes, I'll put in the show notes, the links to Dan's social media, the website. So if you didn't get that the first time, look at the show notes. All right. So. But if you want to get a hold of us, especially if you're a creator, if you want to talk to us like that, especially if you want to talk, next time we can have a Charlie Esser probably. Email us, capesandlunatics@gmail.com, or call the voicemail 614-382-2737. That's 614-38-CAPES. And you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You could watch this video on our YouTube channel. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel. You could see me and Dan. Lilith, of course, hides in the shadows. But
naturally.
Yes. But links to all our social media, the YouTube channel, our Patreon, where we're talking all things Star Trek, merch, everything, all in one place. That's Linktree, linktr.ee/capesandlunatics. And hey, support our sponsors, Tweaked Audio.
Get yourself some headphones.
Oh man, you should have Charlie last night. You probably were you listening to this interview with Dan on quality headphones? Maybe you missed something. You should go get yourself some Tweaked Audio headphones.
Just have him do the commercials. That's fine.
I want him to record it, and I just got to hit a button. But and Hunt a Killer.
Michelle Gray needs your help, guys. Come on, let's get on it.
Especially in the month of October, they're putting out the Blair Witch thing.
Yep, I'm excited.
Yeah, so use Southgate, the promo code Southgate for both of those for a handy dandy discount. And if you love podcasts, go pick up Pod Life the book, now in digital and paperback.
Volume 1.
Volume 1, yes, because Volume 2 is in the works, yes. But go on Amazon and pick that. You can pick that up either way. And when you're on Amazon, use the link for Southgate Media Group right down there in the show notes. Doesn't affect you at all. Doesn't affect your price, your Amazon Prime, nothing. But it kicks a little over to Southgate Media Group to help us support this show, Southgate Media Group Network, and of course, Molly Southgate's dad, Rob.
Make it rain, so says Master Doom. Nice mustache, Charlie.
I'd throw in Charlie as a reference. All right, Lilith, where can the people find you?
If you guys want to hang out with me on the interwebs, you can find me on Twitter at Lilith Hellfire, or of course on Instagram with the cool kids and your hip grandparents at Lilith Hellfire 86 or at Lilith Hellfire 69.
I never disappoint.
I never disappoint.
That's right. All right. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Dan. Great interview. We really do need to talk to him again when he has a new project or something. And I'm jealous of that voice.
Buttery smooth.
I know. It feels like a voice for a radio or a podcast. Jeez.
Don't give him any ideas.
I should have asked about that. You might do a podcast or something. I mean, you saw that mic. I mean, he's doing something.
Oh, he says he streams a lot for interviews and stuff, so maybe that's why.
No. Oh yeah, they did like a 4-hour stream. He did say. Lilith's like, don't give Phil any ideas. There you go, Lil. One sitting, and we got all our podcasters for the week.
I mean, Danielle would kill us, but
the dogs be crossing their legs. All right. Oh, but for another week, we have been your capes.
Ampersand Lunatics. Although we know it's singular.
Thank you, Dan.